Thanks, Pavlina, and pleasure to be with all of you today. I'll just wait for my slides to come up. But yeah, to already start, I couldn't agree more with what Samantas was walking through. This really resonated also with the approach that we take to circularity. Now, thanks. We can already go to the next one. I think Saman also already made the point of basically there is a huge impact of the textile sector. So we know in terms of GHG emissions, in terms of microplastics, there are huge impacts because of the underutilization of textiles, which actually also has an economic impact. So all of this sort of necessitates that move towards more circular models away from the linear models that Pavlina you referred to. So on the next slide, you can see our attempt to visualize the different R's into a circular loop. And this is based on the UNEP circularity platform. So basically, as also was already said, the idea is, of course, to close the loop, but to also really make sure that the materials are kept at their highest possible value as they move and are retained as long as possible in the value chain. So that means indeed that, first of all, there is an overarching principle of reduce by design. And then also we have to really think about how do we design the products, which kind of materials go into them, which kind of chemicals do go into them. Will they prevent us from repairing products or from remanufacturing them, from recycling them later on, etc. Now, you see here that we're actually talking about the value chain. So if we look at the value chain as opposed to just the supply chain, this does not only include the product life cycle, so sort of from the raw material production through to the use and then end of use, end of life, or the different loops, but this also includes all of the actors of the system. So the actors that get value from the system, but also the actors that value, because let's say they live, for instance, close to a textile factory, and maybe the local water will have chemicals in it. And this is really important because to really move this system towards more circularity, it's not enough to just talk about the processes, but we really need to think about the stakeholders and the actors and their role. And closing the loop also means to really think about the business models that shape the system, and to also think about the consumption patterns that are connected to those, but also the government incentives and other points. So it's quite a comprehensive list of actions to consider to affect that move. And also not to be forgotten is this has to be a just transition. So when we talk about moving towards more circularity, we also have to think about how this will impact some stakeholder groups and some regions. Now, on the next slide, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but basically what we have done is we did some analysis to look at the global textile value chain and see where different impacts occur. So for instance, impacts around climate emissions, impacts about land use, impacts around water, and so on. And we've been trying to identify hotspots. So just for those of you who aren't familiar with this word, a hotspot is basically a stage in the life cycle of a product that accounts for a significant part of its impacts. So by adopting sort of this hotspot analysis approach, it helps to narrow it down and to really focus on those interventions that are priority needs and that can achieve the biggest possible reduction potential. And it also helps us to be aware of potential trade-offs and burden shifting, because we might implement one action that will improve thing on one side, but maybe might make another thing worse. Now, if we go to the next slide, what's also important to consider when we talk about the shift to circularity is that the status quo that we have now, and you can see the more linear system that we have at the moment on the slide, there's also a bit of an unjust flow along the value chain, meaning that with rising value of the product, so rising value add, the stages move more towards the developed countries. And the stages of lower value add are primarily taking place in developing and transitioning economies. And this, of course, has also been caused by the sort of global textile industry and how we're sort of always looking for the cheapest possible production. So this is also something that, of course, needs addressing and needs to be considered. Now, for the next slide, if we move towards more of the actions, so it really is something that all of the stakeholders have to drive together. And we've been doing a lot of consultations with different stakeholder groups to see really how can we drive that sector towards more circularity and sustainability. And I think first we always think about sort of actions that can be implemented by the big brands, by retailers, by governments. But we also want to make the point that everybody has a role to play. So also for instance, the suppliers that are more the textile SMEs, of course, they depend on other actors to enable them, but they also have agency to also be part of that change and drive it. But also we have to think about the role of financial institutions and about the role of those that are engaging with consumers. So the three sort of key needs that we found in our consultations are, the first one is around stronger governance and policies. So really for governments to set the level playing field, to incentivize more sustainable business models through different means, such as, for instance, public procurement or maybe subsidies, incentives, and so on. But also to coordinate amongst each other, because this is a global value chain. So the policy actions also need to be coordinated at a global level. The other point is around collaboration and finance. And here it's really about making sure that everybody, as I said, is part of the transition. And that means that especially the more vulnerable players in the textile value chain, such as small and medium companies, they also need financial support to make that transition, but also collaboration in terms of sharing of technologies, sharing of knowledge. And the third point that's really crucial are changes in consumption habits, because obviously we're all also individuals that are part of the system, and by our everyday choices, we can also change and enable change in that system. And for that, of course, there needs to be more education, and there also needs to be more transparency and traceability, because consumers also have to be informed with reliable information and with clear information in order to take those decisions. So I think I might leave it here, but happy to answer any other questions that come up. Thank you.